Before they were world famous, before they were part of the British invasion, before they were the Beatles, they were just John, Paul, George, and Ringo, teenage boys who dreamed of stardom. So how did they meet, and how did they ultimately become the Fab Four? Award-winning journalist and author Larry Kane is here with the story of when the Beatles were just boys, and his storytelling starts right now. Hello everyone, it's good to have you with us. I'm Lynn Doyle, and like most people of my generation, I grew up with the Beatles. Who can forget their famous appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, their meteoric rise to fame, the drama of their years together, and then of course that infamous split. Then there was their post-Beatles fame, untimely deaths, and their long-time place in rock and roll history. But how much do we actually know about the early years? How did they get together, and what transpired to make them the most famous foursome on the planet? Well, journalist Larry Kane, who in 1964 and 65 was the only American reporter to accompany them on their tour here, and who has written extensively about them, wanted answers to those very questions. So he started researching, and what he found resulted in his latest book. It's called When They Were Boys, The True Story of the Beatles' Rise to the Top. He's joining us now to share some never-before tales of the lads. Great to have you here.
Lynn, thanks for having me here. You know, it's the true story is the key word here, because in the Beatles' history, there are a lot of liars. and there are a lot of people who just have their own version. And because people pass on, they sort of live to tell the story. And the idea was to find out, where do they come from? Who were they? What are the myths? And I think I've done okay in trying to find that out.
I would imagine that it was quite challenging because, you know, this didn't just occur a year ago or 10 years ago. Their rise to fame almost 50 years ago.
50 years ago, and it took 7 to 8 years from the time most of them were 15 to the time they were 22 or 23 to really make it. But here's the most interesting thing. I'll tell you the story of the hair. There are 15 different stories about the hair. Okay, one person says, my mother's hair was on the wall in a picture of my mother, and John liked it and he decided to have the hair that way. Then you'll have the people who say, well, I told him to cut their hair long. The fact is they had a French visit to Montmartre in 1961, 1962, Paul McCartney and John Lennon, just to have some fun. And a guy named Jürgen Vollmer, sort of a beatnik type of person, very intellectual, started cutting their hair that way. And that's how it happened. It's as simple as that. And how did the name come about? Well, some people say it came from the Marlon Brando movie, The Wild Ones, about the motorcycle gangs. There was a group called the Beatles, Beatals. And the fact is that they liked Buddy Holly, and they liked the Crickets. And so just like Chubby Checker followed Fats Domino, Checkers and Dominoes, the Beatles decided to go from the Silver Beatles to the Beatles to the Beatles.
So these are the kinds of things that we'll find when we read this book.
A lot more shocking than that.
I want to get to the more shocking stuff, because we've read Ticket to Ride, which was your first book about their career. We've read Lennon Revealed, which was about John Lennon's life and untimely death. So what will we learn that will shock us in When They Were Boys?
Quite a bit. Number one, everybody thought they came from poor backgrounds. Only Ringo came from a poor background. His mother, till the day she died, kept a piggy bank at home to make sure, even though he was successful, to make sure things would be okay. He had no bathroom in his house. The bathroom was located outside. They lived in a very, very poor environment. And John's life was split between two mothers. His mother, Julia, who was kind of fanciful and wild a little bit, but she gave him loving, nurturing support. And then his aunt actually was the guardian, and she was tough. In the backyard of his house was a place called Strawberry Field, which was an orphanage, and John would go there every day to play with the kids. He'd climb over the wall, and his aunt said, John, you should not go there. It's not the right thing to do. And he said, it's nothing to get hung about. And it came up they're not going to hang you for this. And it came up in the song, Strawberry Fields. Paul McCartney had a loving mom, and both John and Paul suffered a commonality. Both of their mothers died during their teenage years. And George Harrison had this wonderful family. His father drove the number 81 bus. He drove the Beatles, the Quarrymen, to their first concerts. And just the support was enormous. But how they got from obscurity to the success is amazing.
So let's talk a little bit about that. How did they know each other, or did they know each other when they were just teenagers?
Well, Paul McCartney and George Harrison used to live near the Speke Airfield, which is now John Lennon International Airport, and they used to try to dismantle unspent German bombs when they were 5 years old.
As boys do.
Yeah, right. Post-World War II. So they were friends, sort of. And then John had a group called the Quarrymen. They were all of his schoolmates, and they weren't very good, but he was. And the crowd started screaming after him and chasing after him. There's a picture of the Quarrymen on the flatbed of their truck. And he decided one day to join the Woolton Fair, the Rose Fair, in June and July of 1955, 57. And that day, it is said that a young man riding a bicycle, a 10-speed bicycle, was coming through the streets of Liverpool, combing his jet black hair at the same time he was keeping his bicycle steady, carrying a left-handed guitar on the left-handed side, and looking for John Lennon, and that was Paul McCartney. And they met that night. Paul taught him how to tune a guitar, and they became somewhat friends. A lot of friction from the beginning.
Let's talk about that fate that would bring those two people together.
Well, who would know? At the
Who
time,
knew that they would become John
friends,
and Paul?
But from the beginning, there was tension. There was, teenage tension. High school. You know what high school is about, everybody? All the little
I remember vaguely.
mean girls and boys, and the Facebook stuff that goes on now.
Right.
They were very tense, but they did rehearse together. They beat each other up a little bit. They physically. But they wanted to form a band, so Paul joined the Quarrymen. And he put some people out of business, including Rod Davis, John's good friend, who went to Cambridge and became a scholar. So, life goes on.
There's a
George.
destiny for people, and apparently it was not his destiny to be part of the
And
Beatles.
then came George.
Where did George fit in? How did
Paul
he
brought him in.
meet these two?
Paul knew that he loved the guitar. He had not played in a band before, although he tried. He tried his own band called the Flaming Something. And they brought him in, and they were very raw. The first thing they did was go to a place called the Jacaranda, which was a nightclub and coffee house. In the daytime, it's catered to business people, nighttime to students. In the Jacaranda, they washed the ladies' room every night. They painted the ladies' room. They were what they called coffee house layabouts, and they pleaded with the owner, Alan Williams, to give them a break. And finally, he did. He had them play. Their first appearance was at the Casanova Club, where they backed up for Janet the Stripper. Okay. Janet the Stripper was
Not
their
most auspicious start.
Well, Aunt Mimi said to John, "What are you doing, John?" And he just hoped she wouldn't find out. John was a milkman in those days, by the way. And the second big opportunity was that he took them to Hamburg. And in Hamburg, he played a dual role.
And I want to talk about Hamburg because there was some controversy that surrounded that trip, and actually questioned whether or not they would continue forward. But where did Ringo fit in here? Because he's not, for those people who are Beatles true fans, he's not the original Beatle.
No, the aficionados, there are three levels of Beatle fan. The ones who love their music, the ones who want to follow them, and the ones who pretend to know every single fact. Okay? Ringo played in a band called Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. Rory Storm was the Elvis Presley of Great Britain. He was wild. He was a stammerer, but he never stammered when he sang music. Rory Storm eventually paved the way for Ringo to join the Beatles, and they replaced the most successful, happiest, and popular Beatle in England. His name was Pete Best. He played the guitar well. He was James Dean, good looking. But unfortunately, simmering hostilities happened. And then one day, a remarkable thing happened. Brian Epstein took the boys and their families to the Manchester Playhouse. Mona Best couldn't go because Pete Best's mother had an affair with one of the roadies who was 20 years younger, and that became Rogue Best, who's his brother. So at the concert, all the boys left the stage, and Pete was stuck behind stage because they could not get him out. And you want me to continue after or now?
No.
They couldn't get him out, so they put him in a hamper. I'm sure you've seen in hotels where they're pushing the hamper down with the sheets and pillows, cases and all that. They put him in the hamper, and the boys were waiting for him. Where is he? Where is he? This girl came up with a pair of scissors, and she went to cut a piece of his shirt off. That's how popular he was.
Right.
Unfortunately, she slashed him with a laceration in his chest, and he started bleeding. So he comes back to the bus. He is a nervous wreck. He can't believe this is going on. He's a pretty quiet guy, even today. And he gets in, he's bleeding in his shirt, and Paul McCartney's dad, who's the nicest man you've ever met, and I've never met him, of course, because he died before,
right,
comes up to him and says, "Pete, are you happy? Once again, you've showed up the boys." That was the beginning, honestly, of the end of Pete Best and that band.
Oh. See,
Sad,
these are the
isn't it?
kinds of things that we're going to find out when you read the book. We have to take a quick break, but we want to give you the opportunity to join in. So if you want to ask Larry some questions about the Beatles, something that you'd like to know, feel free to go ahead and do that. Is there a rumor perhaps that you've heard that you'd like to check out? Maybe some things that you heard about the Beatles in the early years that you'd like to get confirmation on? Or maybe you have a recollection that you'd like to share. Any of these things, we'd love to have you. You can email me directly right now at lynn@lynndoyle.net. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back again, everyone. I'm Lynn Doyle. This is It's Your Call. And even though it's Your Call, you're seeing a very familiar Comcast Network face here with us. Of course, he's the Dean of Philadelphia Journalism. Larry Kane is our special guest. He's written yet another book, this time about the Beatles' early years. So we're giving you the opportunity, if you were a fan either back then or throughout the years, if you have questions or comments you want to share with us, you can go ahead and email me right now, or you can find us on Facebook. We've already gotten some questions for Larry about the Beatles, specifically about when they were young and not yet famous. So I thought maybe we'd start with some.
Sure, of course.
You up for that? Okay, so Rich has written in and he says, who was the smartest among the four in terms of a business sense? Who actually made most of the decisions for the group?
I think in the beginning, from a business sense, there's no question it was Paul McCartney. Mm-hmm. Paul McCartney was the smooth character in this. John Lennon was the guy who said in public what he thought in private. Paul was the guy who kept it to himself and wanted to be loved by everyone. So as a result, he was a little bit more of a visionary. But remember, they were very young. But he would say, let's get a few more pounds every week for a concert. And I think that until they got Brian Epstein as their manager, he really sufficed in that regard.
Well, that's a great segue, because I was just going to ask before we went to the next question about management and when Brian came in, if that could be reflected on as the point where their path to success really started.
Well, actually, it started juicing things up before he got involved, because he got involved late in 1961 and signed a deal with them in January 1962. But having said that, they were already on a bit of a run. When I say a bit of a run, the time I met them in February 1964 and summer of '64 was only 2 years after they were still struggling. That's why a lot of the interviews I discovered had talked about things I didn't know about.
Right.
And he came in, and what he did for them was clean them up. And by clean them up, I'm talking about get away from the leather jacket, the blackboard jungle look, the jeans. They still had their Cuban boots. And they all of a sudden they appeared in what most people thought were space-age outfits. There were no lapels.
Right.
They had the ability to look like they were about to take off in one of those rockets in early 1960s. The moon rockets where John Kennedy said we go to the moon. Mm-hmm. They looked very clean cut. Although my father actually, I think I've told you this before, warned me before I left to travel with them. Watch your back. They got long hair. They're a menace to society.
It's so funny you'd say that.
And he says, watch your back. You'll be. And I called him from the trip. He said, is everything okay? And I said, they're fine people. So they looked, and he made them palatable for young adults and parents.
Well, it's interesting about parents, because you said that about your dad. That was my father's reaction. They had the long hair, and so they were hippies. There had to be something wrong with them.
Yeah.
And I was young when they came out, but they were there for a very long time as I approached my preteen and teen years. And he always had a prejudice against them because of the hair. And then later in the '60s, how much longer did it get?
Their hair was about the length of mine, maybe a little bit, even at this age, a little longer.
Right.
And the interesting thing is that their first manager was really the guy who serviced them in different ways. His name was Alan Williams. Mm-hmm. And Alan Williams is 81 years old now, 82 years old. And I sat down with him at 10 o'clock in the morning when he had his orange juice, which is wine, red wine. And he said, don't talk to me after noon because I'm useless. and we started talking about, he took them to Hamburg. And in Hamburg, John Lennon was almost arrested for stealing a harmonica. Paul McCartney and Pete Best were accused of setting a fire in a nightclub and chased after by goons of a nightclub owner. And John Lennon got out safe, but Alan Williams was also a part-time doctor. They lived in this place called the Bamboo-Kino, which was an art theater. And in those days, an art theater showed what would be R-rated today. And they lived among prostitutes and women of the night, and they had a lot of fun. And every 4 or 5 days, Alan would become what he called the pox doctor. He would bring in penicillin and make them well. And the fact is, here you've got almost out of teenage years, except for George, who was 17, I believe, or 18. And you got them living this way and living in filth. And one of the reasons they loved Stuart Sutcliffe, who later died, was that he fell in love with a German woman named Astrid Kircher. And they would be able to go to her house once a week and take a bath.
Oh,
I mean, it was pretty bad.
It's funny because it was scandalous at the time, and that doesn't really shock many people right now.
No.
I have to go back to some more questions because I want to get as many in as I can. This one comes from Anne Marie, and she was listening to what you had to say earlier and said, was Ringo ever really accepted by the others, or was he always second best to their first choice?
No, he was accepted by the others. He was accepted warmly and graciously by the others because they did a lot of bills together. They played together on the same stage in Hamburg and at the Cavern. So they liked him right away. They really did. And whatever animosity they had toward Pete for whatever reason would disappear. But here's the big problem. In the first days of Ringo's ascension to the Beatles, people camped out on Pete's house. One guy tried to punch George Harrison about it. It was a very emotional thing, but it all goes away in life and people forget.
Right.
And he also did very well on stage. Also, although I'm going to tell you something that a lot of people don't know. Only the Beatle aficionados would know this. Ringo and Best were both replaced by a session drummer when they recorded music.
Really?
Yeah, Please Please Me and Love Me Do. And his name was White, his last name was White. And the session drummer is somebody who plays for the recorded music. So Ringo played the, what do they call them, maracas? Maracas, right?
Right.
And he played a little drums on Love Me Do and Please Please Me.
How about that?
And Pete Best was replaced too.
I'm going to win a Trivial Pursuit contest somewhere.
Not that they weren't great drummers, because they're both really fine drummers, but just the idea that George Martin, their producer, wanted a smoother sound.
Our next question comes from Holly, and she wants to know if John and Paul ever started to really like each other and care about each other, because you had mentioned that they were competitive from the very start. Did they eventually, she wants to know, reach a point where they lived in harmony?
It's hard to say that because Yoko says that Paul and his wife, Linda, came to visit a couple of times. In fact, they would surprise them and go to their front door at the Dakota. There's no question Paul tried. I think Paul tried a little harder than John, but Yoko is still aware of that fusion there. They did do several albums attacking each other in lyrics, and there was a lot of animosity. But something, in retrospect, they did so much wonderful things together.
Are they kind of like the Mick and Keith of the Beatles?
No, I wouldn't say that.
Love me, hate me kind of thing?
Keith, first of all,
Can't live without you?
John Lennon never drank like Keith did.
Well, who could?
And I'm told that Mick and Keith don't even talk to each other after like 30 years. They just sort of go and do what they have for business. But they were, as this is a conversation we had.
This is you interviewing the two of them together.
Is that me? Oh my
yes. Oh my goodness. This is worth the price of admission, just looking at the old videotape.
But they were, in this case, very friendly with each other.
I guess it was film then, right?
But film, you can see the dirt in the lens there, or whatever they call that.
Look at you, looking very Dan Ratherish at a young age.
Well, I was only 25.
Really? But still had that air of being the dean.
Still wasn't as cool as these guys are. But there's something very interesting about them. They did help each other at critical times in their lives. And Paul did support Yoko, even though there was controversy and still is between them. John was certainly very, very gracious to Paul's parents, and so there's a lot of kindness. It's not the kind of schism that you would see between groups today where everybody attacks each other on TMZ, or if you're doing a show about entertainment, you see people attacking each other. It wasn't that way.
We have to take a short break, but we have another rumor that we want Larry to confront and either confirm or deny for us. It has to do with John's sexuality. So if you want to know the answer to that, you have to stay with us. We'll continue our discussion here about the Beatles when they were just boys right after this. Good to have you back with us. I'm Lynn Doyle, and on the cover of Philadelphia Row Home magazine this month is Larry Kane. Yes, the Dean of Philadelphia Journalism. There he is, Larry Kane, interviewing, and right there you see him with Paul McCartney, but he's interviewed the Beatles. He's written a new book about it. It is featured in this magazine along with a lot of his recollections of when they were just young. It's the 7 years before they really became world famous and became what we know as the FAB Four. Larry, in this magazine, it also mentions that there is a premiere event coming up in September that kind of kicks off the book sales.
I hope you're there. September 19th at V, which is a beautiful spot on Broad Street, VIE, sponsored by Row Home magazine, benefiting the GAMP Music School and Sing On Philadelphia and MS Society. And it's all by Row Home, and I appreciate it.
Okay, well, we certainly hope that get a big crowd out for that.
And by the way, it's free.
And it's free. Hey, yeah. Even more. Okay, so before we get to the rest of your questions, there was one that came in. It was an anonymous question, and I asked you if there had been any rumors that you'd heard throughout the years. And one of them, Larry came. It was very candid, but she didn't want her name on the screen. Wanted to know whether or not there was any truth to the fact that John was bisexual or homosexual.
I would say probably not. Yoko will tell you that he might have had the potential to experiment, but that is probably did not happen. He was kind of a wild guy, but I would tell you from my experiences traveling with him, he was about as heterosexual as you can get.
I guess if you're a member of the Beatles,
that's
right?
all I can say.
Okay, and one last question that we're going to use. People wanted to know if there were any rituals that the Beatles performed before they went out on the
they were
stage.
actually, Paul never met a mirror or a comb he didn't like. He used to have a gigantic comb, or a girl, and he used to have a gigantic comb. They actually sat very nervously and by the way, they asked, unlike the contracts of today, they asked for only three things. They wanted ice, Coca-Cola, Coke, not Coca-Cola, and clean towels.
Wow.
They were very,
so
very
I guess
simple.
from their humble beginnings, they
never had that kind of show business.
Right, I was going to say that would be the perks that they had in the business.
And they're kind of nervous before the concerts.
We don't have a lot of time, but if they came out today, if the four young men from England came out today, would they have the same kind of success, or were they so unusual for the time that that's what contributed to it?
Well, they were so unusual for the time. It's hard to say if they would today, but there's one thing that differentiates the Beatles from all the groups. From all the groups, they wrote their music. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the music, as time goes on, you went through three phases. Fandom, we love them, we love them, we love them, like you see there. Then a lot of respect for the early music. Then this feeling in the 80s and 90s, the iconic feeling that they have compiled the greatest collection of music in recorded history. And that really is the reason that they're still great today.
And you know, whether they were popular then or now, if the music wasn't good, it wouldn't have sustained for nearly 50 years.
No, and they didn't have a wild act. They didn't jump all over the stage. They didn't destroy guitars. They didn't blow up things.
No bad eating.
So it was. They were really good.
Okay. Well, if you were a Beatles fan then, you're going to love this book. If you have followed the Beatles, if you know, a whole new generation now is starting to enjoy Beatles music, so you have to get this book, When They Were Boys: The True Story of the Beatles' Rise to the Top, by our own Larry Kane. Thank you so much for being here.
Lynn, thanks for this. You've done this for every one of my books.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate it.
Continued success to you. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you the next time.